Welcome back to the channel, guys. I'm joined today by Jake. I don't know how to pronounce your last name. Can you help me out with that?
Roque.
Okay, okay. Where's that
Mhm.
name from?
It's French. Yeah,
Okay.
my dad's side of the family is French Creole
Ah,
from
I
like
see.
Louisiana area in the United States. So
Okay.
yeah,
You ever been to France?
I have been to France. I lived there for like a little over 2 months, like
Okay.
maybe 5 years ago over a summer. Just it was before my senior year of college, and I
Okay.
was had some plans to live in LA, and then they fell through, and I just thought, where should I go? Yeah, I'll go to France. What the heck?
Go to the ancestors.
Yeah, right.
My wife is French, so I was wondering. Um, and I spent quite a bit of time. It's like if you live in the Netherlands where I live, it's very normal to go on holiday to France. So that's like part of the culture here. But
Yeah, congrats by the way, bro. Congrats
thank you, sir.
on the wedding. You just got back, huh?
Yeah, it's really good. It's really good.
Very
Just
cool.
I feel extremely blessed to have such amazing people in my life that could make this all happen. Like
Hmm.
for us, the wedding was something that was definitely going to happen. I could have seen it just with six people and that's it, and we just do it. And we were on the fence about doing a proper wedding and everything, and we still kept it small, but it was extremely special. So thank you. Um,
Yeah, very cool.
but yeah,
Congrats.
enough about me. I'd like to introduce you to the people watching. Like I said offline, you can share whatever you want to share. Go back as far as you want to go back, and yeah, take it away.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've introduced myself in this way, I guess. But I grew up in Huntington Beach, California. I come from a family of seven total, so I have four siblings. I guess in related to what I've seen you talk about a bit, I grew up in like a kind of like a not super conservative Christian family, I guess, but we always grew up going to church and things like that. My mom worked at our church, and so we were super involved. It's kind of like, halfway daycare, we
Hmm.
spent so much time there, hanging out
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So yeah, I grew up in that, but also too, it was really like it's funny that this is where I'm starting, I guess, but it seems to fit. It was a very like it was a big drug rehab church kind of, and it was like super casual, people coming in like tatted up in tank tops, close to the beach in California, so
Hmm.
flip-flops and board shorts were, like an acceptable part of attire kind of
Yeah.
thing. Um, I played sports in high school. That was a big part of my life, football and volleyball primarily, American football.
Hmm.
And then I went to university, studied business and marketing, was making music at the time, was doing a lot of like making some of my own music, songwriting for other people. That kind of got me into videography and shooting people's music videos. That transitioned to me after I graduated. I moved out to LA and was doing shooting for a lot of different YouTubers, influencers all over the place. People, like rap artists, makeup artists, all different types of artists. Yeah, was doing that for a while, enjoyed it. I sort of There was a series of events that got me more focused in philosophy and psychology and the sort of things that I see you talking about a lot. That was primarily driven, I would say, by interest and curiosity. I'd always been interested in those topics, but also too, there was sort of a turning point where I was noticed that I felt like super like dealing with like depression and anxiety,
Hmm.
essentially, and I noticed a lot of the people around me who had a lot of the things that I thought I wanted were miserable,
Yeah.
like, famous, going on tours, sold out shows, I got to play some big shows and stuff like that. And it's something I really love, but also too, I caught on quick to like, this isn't exactly what it's all about. Like it's all good fun playing big shows, being able to go on tours and, getting flown out to places and hotels and conferences, whatever it was, right? But pretty quickly I was like, yeah, but everybody's depressed though, like everybody is not doing so well. Everybody's not
Yeah.
doing too hot. And myself included, there was a lot of I went from, a lot of the things that I dreamed of having living in LA, having them and being like, this isn't it, you know? And so the pandemic was a big turning point for a lot of people's lives. It was for me for sure. I was sorting through these things already, and I was reading and writing a lot, probably like 2018, 2019. I read the Gulag Archipelago, most of it before the pandemic happened. And
Mm.
that had a really, really big impact on me. 2020 rolls around. I was sort of focused on more the psychological and spiritual elements of things, but then that bled into the political for me. And
Yeah.
so, especially after reading the Gulag Archipelago, I started to be like, wait a second. Like, is this all repeating? Is history repeating right here in
Yeah.
front of my face? Like, this doesn't look so good. I don't feel so good about where things are headed. Um, I ended up in this time, couple primary things that I guess I'll wrap with. I went back to school and got my master's in psychology, which took a couple years.
Mm.
Um, and that was really worthwhile. I definitely learned a lot. I would say I probably learned more about psychology outside of my studies, my formal studies than inside, you know?
Yeah.
So, to some degree it was, for the paper piece of paper on the wall
Yes.
kind of thing, because you can learn these things without the formal education. But it was a good excuse. Like I did a lot of my research papers actually on like drug use essentially because I found it to be like kind of a more concrete section of psychology, more the neuroscience side, where it's
Yeah.
not just like self-reports and the studies and things along those nature, which are legitimate, but more like here's what these chemicals are doing in your brain. Here's what's happening with psilocybin and mystical experiences that people are having. Here's what's happening with cannabis. Here's how it affects your brain. Here's what's happening with alcohol. Here's how it affects your brain with caffeine, with nicotine. And even just knowing those things, like even learning what I learned about caffeine helps me regulate my use of caffeine like
Mm.
much more than I feel like people around me they don't. And I'm like, yeah, this is like it's actually kind of serious, like this is a drug, like
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's bad, but you got to kind of pay attention to what's going on here. So, a bit of rambling, but so yeah, I was focused on that, and then where I guess the Gulag Archipelago bleeds into the political of what I was talking about. I got really interested in Bitcoin at the time as well, and sort of did a deep dive. I was familiar with it. I actually had an econ teacher in high school in 2013 that was like, "You guys, she's taking us through all these
I had the
currency
same
conversations."
in
Really?
high school. Yeah.
Wow,
The dude,
wow,
like,
wow, yeah.
he made a fortune off it too. I heard years
Huh.
later. Yeah. It's funny.
I met with her actually like, 8 years later. We got lunch, I don't know, like 6 or 7 months ago, and she was like, yeah, we like dabbled in it a bit, but it wasn't like, not like a life-changing thing. And I was like,
Uh,
oh man, like, but
yeah,
that's everybody kind of.
it's
Everybody
true.
hears about it. I heard about it. I thought she was crazy, right? 2013, I was like, oh, I read it like, the headlines about it and was like magic internet money for drug dealers and
Exactly.
criminals, like, yeah, like
Hmm.
but but then 2017 rolled around. I was paying attention again a little bit, bought some, sold some. It wasn't until 2020, I'd say it wasn't until 2021 where I understood Bitcoin. I was getting involved, but I was still doing a little bit of shit coinery, like kind of like,
Hmm.
oh, Solana is going to be great for, what, and
Yeah.
then I mostly think that that's all pretty silly nowadays after deeper research. But yeah, that I saw Bitcoin as a means for a peaceful stepping away from a society that was heading in a direction that I didn't agree with, and also to a society slash government. I would separate those things too a bit, but
Mm-hmm.
those our current rulers in the United States. I was like, one, these people hate me. Two, I don't want to be stuck paying for the idiocy that they've been enacting my whole life that
Yeah.
me and the generations younger than me are paying the most significant price for.
Mm.
So so I had a friend reach out to me who used to work for the UN, and that kind of was a he was basically doing this bid for funding for this um infrastructure bill that was connected to the World's Fair. And that's like all I can say about that. Jeez, that
Yeah.
was um but yeah, and that kind of helped me see like the man behind the curtain a bit and realize
Okay.
like, oh, it's idiots running the place from like
Mm,
the top to the bottom. Like I'm an idiot and the people running the place are idiots. And like, like there's no, in some ways it was the confirmation of the death of the Nietzschean cultural father,
mm,
in that broader sense of like, oh yeah, it's just everybody, it's just a bunch of silly humans trying to like do things. And a lot of them well-intentioned, truly, but um yeah, that made me feel like, oh, I need to get involved in the game that's taking place here. And I saw Bitcoin as the most important tool in that space, essentially. And so now I'm a executive producer of Robert's show,
hmm.
and I moved out to Miami to do that from Bali, Indonesia. I'd taken a couple sabbaticals there for like 4 months, essentially, just to study and read and write and
That's
work
lovely.
on myself, so to speak. Yeah, yeah. I mean, lovely, lovely place. I miss it all the time. Um,
You go back, wouldn't you?
I'll be back at some point in time. I'll be back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
barely
so
know
now I'm in
anyone that
Miami
goes
doing
that
that.
doesn't want to go back, you know?
Right,
It's
right. I
always
mean,
like,
it's yeah, bro, it's great. There's such interesting people there too. It's just filled with weirdos,
hmm.
Just like the type of people who don't fit in their societal boxes from all over the place, from Australia, from Russia, from Europe, from Vietnam, from Korea, from wherever.
Mm.
And yeah, it's just such a fun place. You can learn so much about different cultures so quickly as a result from that
Yeah.
too. And so,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's lovely. Okay.
that we'll take that as an intro.
Beautiful. No, it's great. It's great. I think that there's a lot of branches I can climb onto. So
Cool.
there's many different directions we could take it. I think Bitcoin is an interesting direction. I'm not sure if it's very interesting to you right now. What do you think? Is it something that you would be happy to speak to people about? Because a lot of people listening would be like very basic understanding. Um, it's something we can dive deeper into.
Let's put it on the back end. I feel like
Yeah.
it's not, you're right. Yeah, we talked a little bit before. It's not the thing that like excites me the most. However,
Hmm.
I think it's really important too.
Yeah.
It's up there. I sort of tire of it for the reasons of, we said this off camera, but I spend a lot of time working in the space. I'm hearing conversations, 10 hours of conversations about Bitcoin every week and that sort of stuff, and I do, it is really important to me, but also too, as I was saying before, it, essentially, like I feel like one of my callings in the space is to remind people, like, as important as this is, as useful of a tool as this is, it's just money.
Yeah.
It's only a tool. And it's a tool in that, and it's a good tool. And good, I mean like in that in a technical sense, sort of, in that like in a moral sense of like it's good. I think it's a good thing, but like it's not the good. Sometimes
No,
I feel like it's
exactly.
elevated to too high of a place, right?
Yeah.
And and that doesn't work.
No.
So
Yeah, it's what I
yeah.
started noticing as well. I tired of it for similar reasons too, even though it still intrigues me enough because I think it's very important. But it's just putting it at the highest place and trying to explain everything by means of it. And even more than that, I feel that when I start talking about topics related to Bitcoin, I very easily and quickly take the position of like, well, I could really argue pretty well how Bitcoin could make this better. And
Hmm.
I feel like that's not good for me because it stops me to think. It stops me to really critically consider the irreducible complexity of all situations. I'm just like,
Hmm.
well, I think Bitcoin could actually be a really good answer to this. I think it makes me a bit lazy in that sense and a bit more critical.
Sure. Sure.
Uh,
And there's the popular idiom Bitcoin fixes this,
yeah,
but me and one of my best friends, Michael, who works with me on the show, we there's been a number of times where we'll be chatting about something and be like, Bitcoin doesn't fix this. Like Bitcoin fixes a lot of stuff, man. I like truly, I think it's quite, people have no idea the I think like the ultimate reaches of how much it's going to transform society, how much it's going to transform the ideas of states and governments as a whole, because they're so, the separation of money and state, it's possible that it's going to be a bigger societal shift than the separation of church and state was
yes.
in the United States. I think it's more fundamental to the nature of
Hmm.
the state. But also too, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of things that Bitcoin doesn't fix. Bitcoin doesn't fix this.
Mm. Yeah, it
Yeah.
reminds me of Eric Weinstein when he first came on. I think he came on
Hmm.
Peter's show, and he's like, "You guys are right. Money plays much bigger role than people think, but not that much. Like, it is
Hmm.
bigger than you
Hmm.
think, but sometimes I think people take it too far, and especially see that when there's clearly like things, especially this idea of cleaning your room before you start to transform the world. And you go to
Certainly,
Bitcoin
certainly.
conferences and you meet some of these people and like, well, I think there's a lot of things you haven't faced, but here we are complaining about the central bank. And I'm sure
Right,
that,
right. Because it's so tempting. It's so easy to get sucked up in that too,
yeah,
because it's like, because it's just, I mean, it's why people like virtue signal, kind of, like it's a
mhm,
temptation for everybody. It's this like, oh, well, it's assuming the role of the critic in society, and there's utility to criticism. You need it,
yeah,
like at a certain point, but it's like, yeah, criticize the world when your house is in perfect order, right? And if your house isn't in perfect order, which I moved to Miami 3 months ago, and I was saying it's still, it was good for me to have this call set up so I could, like, finish setting up some of the stuff that I have here, which I want to ask you a question about some of this art I have behind me too. I
yeah,
was wondering if you'd be familiar, but yeah, it's like it's so tempting to do all those things when it's like, no, 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 no. Like, if for me, if my house is messy, I'm like depressed basically.
yeah,
I like nothing is right. Like nothing, it doesn't matter what else I'm up to. Like,
mm,
and that's been the case for a while.
yeah,
Really, I've been so focused on some other things. And so I've been attacking that for like a month now. I've been trying to refocus on that essentially. But
mm. Yeah, I feel
yeah,
very
do you
similarly.
know do you know Mudhut Illustrations?
Oh,
M Emily Verduin. I asked because, and I might be butchering her name, but I asked because I came across her years ago, like 4 years ago,
yeah.
about uh and I came across her art on Instagram first, and I think a year after I started following her, I listened to her on Vanderklay on
Ah,
his episode,
okay.
yeah, or his channel a
That's the
long time
connection.
ago, and
Yeah,
then I saw you guys had a chat, and so
yeah. No, I'm not deeply versed in Paul's videos actually, and I told him that because I was always into Peterson and Vervaeke and all these thinkers, but I never got into Paul until the very end,
okay,
because
yeah.
we personally met. And so, no, I'm not. But you have art of hers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'll show you one of them.
Yeah, please
I'm
do.
like, I think they're so cool. This one's an original. I'll show you these two actually. I'll bring this one over first.
I'll put the
So,
conversation in the description if I can find it with Paul. Yeah.
oh yeah, heck yeah. Okay, so there's a glare, but so it says right here, what does it mean to serve? And then what does it mean to be ruled? And a lot of her
Mm-hmm.
art is like, it sort of has this like balance, like yin yang
Yeah.
sort of frame, but also a lot of it is like based on the Bible. She did this series called the just shout out Mud Hut while we're up in this
Yes. Yeah. So I will try to
library.
find the links. If you have them as well, we'll put it
Cool.
down for people to see.
But yeah, yeah. I drop it. They're just, I think it's like kind of up your alley. This is her creation.
Ah,
And so
yeah.
it's like the 7 days of
Kamandala.
creation. Yeah, and it's beautiful stuff. I saw it. I think there's this Jung quote about something like, I keep on forgetting that. I'll give me one sec. I'll come
Yeah.
back
Take your time.
and talk into the mic.
No, yeah. So I will put her stuff in the description for those listening. And I saw on the first one it's like an owl, a rabbit, and an eagle. Is that correct?
Uh,
Yeah. That's nice though.
I don't know
I
if
like
you're
the colors.
making edits. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, it's cool stuff. Yeah, I think it's kind of up your alley
Yeah.
from what I've seen. And she writes a bit about the pieces too, so it's really interesting.
Cool. Yeah, we'll link it. Okay, I'll go into some of the questions I have
Cool.
for you based on what I've learned thus far. One thing that I really liked from well, actually I'll start up with this. You write poems and you post some videos where you read them out, and I thought that was really beautiful. I showed my wife as well. Um like really,
Thanks,
really
man.
cool. And I'd like to know your relationship to poetry. How did you get into this? Where did this start, and what you get out of it now?
It probably mostly originates from being a songwriter when I was younger. Um, and then it was probably in like 2018, 2017 maybe. I just started writing a lot. And it was sort of at the from the advice of Peterson, in that frame of like if there's like things that are disturbing you, you need to write about them, or
Mm,
if you don't have a clear vision of your future, if you don't know where you're going, like you need to know where you're going. That's very important, like you need to have an aim sort of thing. And so I
yeah.
started writing a lot from that angle, as well as so sort of like from a journaling angle of like sorting through my own crap sort of thing of like what's going on, what am I feeling, sort of like reintegrating emotions into who I was. I like grew up, I had, I guess, like long story short, I had like me and my dad get along really well nowadays. We get along really well, but growing up we butted heads hard, and like sometimes like getting a little scuffle kind of thing,
Yeah.
and so part of what that did for me was it made me, as part of like a survival mechanism, maybe a bit of a dramatic word,
Mm.
coping and survival mechanism. uh I was never like, nobody was threatening my life at any point
No,
in time, to
exactly.
be clear, yeah,
Yeah.
but I got really really good at being ice cold, just like, and the only emotion I ever felt was like anger, and I got good at, not the only emotion, but you get what I'm saying.
Mm.
And uh and and I got really good at just like being stone cold kind of thing, but you sacrifice a lot when you do that, of course. And so when I began writing, it was in many ways a conscious attempt to like reintegrate emotions into who I was. So it's like, okay, well, I've done a bad job of integrating and learning from and understanding my emotions. I remember once for like 8 years, like I didn't cry basically.
Wow.
Like one time, and I cry all the time now, bro. I like
Yeah.
watch something sad comes up on my, or no, something like whatever, something inspiring or
Yeah.
inspiring, whatever it is, comes up on my Instagram feed, and I'm all like, oh,
Hmm.
I would say my emotions are, I pay attention to them now, and I find them very, very useful. Um, and so yeah, when I started writing, it was sort of like a processing, integrating my emotions. And that was like work at first. It comes a lot more naturally to me now, but at
Yeah.
first it was like, okay, I felt like I was like discovering what it was like to like have normal human emotions to some degree, which I think is something a lot of men either do or like should do,
Mm.
because it perhaps comes less naturally to us. But yeah, so that, coming from that, with that music songwriting background, then doing that writing that was more like introspective, that I think those two things combined kind of led me to a place where I was writing things and I wanted to share them. And then I sort of just noticed that when I would write something and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it, I would notice that there would be this underlying like rhythmic feel to it, kind of, because that's just like the disposition of my personality. Is there's like a disposition towards creativity and beauty and things like that. So
Mm.
so how the writing felt was super important, like how it, when you read it, and the cadence of things and the rhythm. And then I always write with music too, and then sometimes I felt like this doesn't feel right without that song that I wrote it to.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't feel right without that. And then so it became somewhere between regular writing. It's not poetry like standard prose and where every line rhymes and that sort of stuff. It's more of yeah, somewhere in between a song and just like a journal entry. And
Yeah.
so I wrote I made this series called This Note to Self. I think I've done maybe like 8 or 9 of them now, which originally they're just writing, and I started capturing video and putting it to music and reading it and doing the whole thing. And so yeah, that's where that comes from, I guess. So that songwriting and
Yeah.
introspective writing
I
sort of
think that's
lane.
really cool. I think it's really a new medium type of thing because I'm not sure if that was even possible before because you really had distinctly had music and poetry. And now there's a bit of a blend between the two. And I see it becoming
Mm.
more popular also with just, I saw some in your stories as well, where you just take a movie scene and you put specific music under it and you see how much more powerful it can get. and
Hmm.
it captures a different type of emotion, I feel.
And
Um,
you almost can tell a different story. There can be something completely different going on
yeah,
with different music underneath it too. And then you combine, yeah, in those series of stories that I have, sometimes, I just save things that like resonate with me, with like where I'm at in that time and place, and then it's so fascinating. A lot of times I don't know what when I do those stories, I don't know what I'm going to
yeah,
click on.
yeah.
I just like start recording and like something feels right and I hit it and then it's another, I'm familiar with them. I've seen them before, but I'm kind of doing it live.
Mm,
And after one video, it's like, oh, okay, that is the next video in this story. It just, and then it's interesting. I find those really interesting to see, have people watch them and see like, what does it make you think? Who do you think of when this scene comes on? Like there's this interesting thing. Who do you think of and like what's going on there? And like, yeah, hearing people's reactions, what they think they mean.
yeah,
There's just like you said, you're more interested in people nowadays. There's like a fountain of wisdom that can come from people sometimes when you just give them that little cue, it's something
yeah,
to like light the spark kind of thing.
yeah. No, absolutely. I, I said that to you offline. That like my interest went from really the world in Bitcoin and in economics and very practical and real things on that level to more psychology, neuroscience, uh, and philosophy, and then back down to the personal because I felt like I was so up in the spheres, coming
Hmm.
back down is really satisfying. But I like to dance between the two, and I think what this medium, what you're doing, does well is that exactly, um, because you're touching on a lot of personal, let's say, personal battles, even maybe when you hear
Hmm.
Peterson talk, for example, or you watch these personal transformations in cartoons or in movies. That pulls me so much, and there's a lot of wisdom embedded in that as well. And so,
It's like all the wisdom is embedded in that. Like I think
yeah,
all wisdom, perhaps all wisdom comes embedded in a story. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And you watch. It's something I've been making a priority lately as I've been kind of burying myself, getting buried in work,
mm-hmm.
like been really focused on work and there's been a lot going on the past month. I'd say I've been like listening to fiction. I've been walking, listening to fiction. I think I've listened to like 10 hours of a book in the past like 3 days or something.
That's lovely.
And yeah, it kind of like re-inspires you for life. And when you lose your way, you listen to stories and you're like, oh yes, that's the proper way.
Yeah,
That is the proper way.
getting back on the track, back on the
Uh,
path. Yeah, it's
mhm.
this idea that's even what faith meant, um, to the ancient Israelites. So Ricky says that faith simply meant to be on the right track in your life, to be properly oriented. And so
Interesting.
I think story does that. And I think that's actually something that was, um, a bit of a revolution 2000, 3000 years ago. I'm not sure what exactly, but that became more important for us. It's the way we are wired. So he speaks about that biblical grammar we have. We cannot help ourselves but to be wired like that, and to, yeah, to need that to orient ourselves. And
Hmm.
so I feel very similarly these days. I starve without story. Whereas before I could literally like read for 10 hours, just dry nonfiction, and it would be fine. But yeah, it's there's just nothing more compelling to me now. And
Hmm.
so I'm not sure what that means for me. But
Yeah, and those things wax and wane, but I'm in a similar phase because I think it's information is so important, data is so important, but the things like underneath that, like I think the fundamental religious question is what is the proper way of being, right? I'm
mm.
sure somebody said that before me. I forget who. Maybe I came up with it. I doubt it. Right? But it's like what yeah, how should you act, and everybody asks that question and everybody wrestles with that question and and the people who think there is no proper way of being, it's like doesn't work. You know
No.
what I mean? It's like try that for 5 years, try that for 10 years, like
Yeah.
see if you're still alive. You know what I mean? See, it's like doesn't work, and so and people, I think this is a Peterson thing too. He talks about how like you'll say there's no proper way of being, to put my words in his mouth, but then you'll say, but then you'll be upset with people for like not treating you the way they ought to in your
Yeah.
eyes, you know,
Yeah.
or you'll be upset with yourself. You'll be laying up at night cringing like, oh, why did I say that thing? Or why did I, you know,
Yeah.
whatever. And so that's indicative of the assumption that there's a proper way of being. And so, you know, you can pretend that that's not the case if you want, but it's not
Yeah.
advisable.
I think it's a difficult thing to speak about simply because to speak about a proper way of being would imply that that it is attainable in some way. Whereas I think it's both unattainable and it's real. So it's like
Certainly,
this
certainly,
ideal self, you
absolutely.
know what I mean? So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think if people understand reality to be on a certain level, then they will take it as not real because it's not attainable. But
That's interesting.
I think you act under the assumption that just because it's unattainable doesn't mean it's not real. That's what I think.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's at
Yeah, I
least how
mean
I think about it.
perfection,
Yeah,
yeah, perfection is unattainable, but there is an semblance of things that are good that would make the ideal. There
yeah,
has to be for such a thing to exist, I guess. But
yeah. And if the ideal wasn't real, then there wouldn't be a way of moving up. Do you know what I mean?
right. And yeah, and if I was thinking of this in the shower today, uh, uh, is that this idea of like I was having a conversation with somebody recently that made me think of it, but it's like if you know suffering is real, right?
Hmm.
One of the fundamental religious axioms. And if you think that if suffering is real and if you've been in pain and if people have wronged you, you know, in psychology, a lot of times, a lot we're trying to separate like right and wrong. We, not me, but psychologists,
Yeah,
you know, are trying to separate like right and wrong from psychological treatment, and it just doesn't work because one, if you're treating somebody, it's like where are you going towards? You're trying to make things better, you know what I mean? And so better, if you're trying to make somebody better, there's obviously a more ideal way of being that you're aiming at, one. And two is that a lot of when people come in with like post-traumatic stress disorder, trauma of any form is an encounter with evil. You know, you wouldn't be traumatized if nothing wrong had happened,
yeah,
you know? And so there's a it's a smashing together of ideas like Peterson famously talks about like postmodernism and Marxism or postmodernism and like basically anything else you would attach it to. It's like incompatible ideas, you know? If there is if all truth is is interpretation of man-made narrative, then it's incompatible with any other like narrative,
yeah,
essentially, you know, that
yeah.
proclaims truth of any sort. But
Hmm. Okay. I will go on. I have a lot of questions, but we only got to like one thus
cool.
far, so we'll probably not get.
I'll
No,
see if
no,
we
no.
can.
But this is good. I want to get to like three max. That's a
Okay,
successful
cool.
podcast. If we
Cool.
ramble on, that's great.
Yeah.
Um, One thing you said was in your poems. I don't know if it was a quote from someone, but it was about dying before getting buried,
Hmm.
and that resonated with me. And I was wondering, how do we prevent ourselves from just doing that, dying before we are buried?
I
Yep.
think that poem starts
Go ahead.
with something along the lines of um you have to do something. Stasis is death.
Mm,
The active redirection of energy to serve a new purpose is life, and many a man has died long before he was buried,
yeah.
right? And so I guess if you contrast it with the idea of stasis is death, it's like you just can't stay still. You have to do something. You got to do
Mm,
something, you know? And if you and because it just I think it's like incompatible with the human experience, you know? It's not really what we're wired for. And so if you sit around and do nothing, I feel like people have a lot of people know what this feels like. It's different for different people, you know? But you like die on the inside kind of, you know? You know that it's not the way you ought to be spending your days. And I use the word spending because it's like you have a limited amount. It's a scarce resource. You know, your
mm,
time is they say your time and Bitcoin are the only things that are truly scarce, you know? And you know, when you think about your time as like a monetary resource in a sense, they say like time is money, right? But if you think of your time as something that you're spending, then it's like you can't afford to sit still and sit around, you know?
Yeah.
And then it goes on to say the active redirection of energy to serve a new purpose is life.
Yeah.
You know, and these words I oftentimes I've written and rewritten and thought about and rethought about those sentences for a long time. And so yeah, the active redirection of energy to serve a new purpose,
Yeah.
right? It's like, well, one, you're directing your energy somewhere, or you can, you know, and that could be like laying on your couch and that's how you spend your energy, right? But then to serve a new purpose is like you need to know what you're aiming at and where you're going. And if you instead are not serving any purpose, and if you instead are not directing your energy, it's like you almost might as well be dead. You know, it's like you're not doing anything, and there's time enough for being dead. You know, like
Yeah. Yeah. No,
there's a
and
limited amount of time
it
for
reminds
living.
me of the idea of consistency, where a lot of people are really obsessed with this idea of consistency, of, going to the gym consistently, putting in the work consistently. But the only, and I heard McGilchrist say this in his latest book,
Mm.
um, the only truly consistent person is dead. So you need to put consistency into service of something higher.
Wow,
Do you know
that's
what I
really
mean?
interesting. The only consistent person is dead.
Yeah, because that's
Right,
when that's
right,
stasis. That's exactly what you say, but it's a different
right.
word. But consistency is a popular word. It's even a
Hmm.
positive word, but stasis isn't. Because stasis sounds like
Right.
it's static. It's whereas
And you have to like forgive yourself preemptively almost of like, okay, you're not gonna like do this perfectly. You know, you can't throw out
yeah,
the ideal. You still need to have the ideal to aim at. But also, I love that the only consistent person is dead. Is it's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, like you're a complex being in a complex universe. Like, you know, things aren't going to go to plan all the time, and that's all right. You know, you can't like let it get to you. If you're like, oh, I was going to work out 6 times this week, and I only did four, and you know,
yeah,
like I'm such a piece of shit. You know.
yeah, yeah. So that's the other side
Yeah,
of
because
like,
I default to that way too hard of like, oh, I aimed at this ideal and then I haven't hit it, and
mhm.
that like unproductive like criticism of self or whatever it is, you know, where it's like, ah, that's not helpful. You gotta go easy with that, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think I'm similar, to be honest. I was more and more that. I think my wife really helps me to be a bit more easy on
That's good,
myself.
man. Man, it is not good for man to be alone, you know? There is
No,
having a woman's perspective on things when you're like in
yeah,
whatever loop is so useful. Yeah.
yeah. I didn't realize how irrational I am with myself sometimes until I got that perspective. Where it's like
Mhm.
one of the things I tell myself, where, for example, before I met her, I was really very seriously dieting, and like I would fear pasta, like I would fear just having
Mhm.
a scoop of rice. I thought that was
Yeah,
just
your
bad.
voice kind of shredded, bro. I clicked on your Instagram and I was like, all right, man, works out, you know? Respect.
But thank you. But it's actually easier now. But back then I
Mhm.
did it with such a hardship in terms of food and in terms of the way I moved. And I think she really helped me to get the perspective. Like, you don't have to go that crazy. That's kind of like the 2% on top of the 98% that's done with the bulk of the work. And so
Right, right,
so I don't
right.
know how we got here, but yeah, I'm pretty irrational on my own. But having other people's perspectives, especially one closest to me, and especially someone who loves you and wants the best for you, I think that's really really important.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'll go to my next one. This is a this is an idea that I think most people would agree with, especially ones that are listening. But sometimes I discuss it with people that don't really consider life's biggest questions, and they'll
Hmm.
be confused by it. And that's the idea that meaning is more important than happiness. And I think a lot of the 21st century operates on the idea that happiness is the most important thing, or comfort, maybe even more than that. Could you articulate why you think, and if you think so, that meaning is more important than happiness?
Importance is I feel like it's almost difficult to make the case for importance,
Okay.
but
I will rephrase the question in that case.
well, no. I think it's a good question. It just it's I because I think a lot of times, somewhat in a pragmatic view, it's like important to what aim, sort of, you
Mm,
know. I guess in terms of the full spectrum of life, I think that you can have meaning in happiness and you can have meaning in suffering. And and happiness is fleeting, and it can't be consistent because perhaps it can be consistent for some, who knows? But
happiness?
it yeah, consistent but not permanent, you know,
Yeah.
because you can't because in almost in a neurochemical sense too, right? There needs to be like a polarity for you to experience it in related to its
Yeah,
opposite.
exactly.
So so I think happiness is I also think you can I think I've made the error of like under prioritizing happiness too. So I
Mm,
don't want to like but you know, I think probably because from that retaliatory place, maybe that's not exactly the right word, but
I
that
understand what you
opposing
mean.
place of
Yeah.
yeah, of like, okay, our society's so focused on happiness, so
Yeah,
now
that
I'm
you
gonna
have
focus
to.
on like meaning and whatever. And then
Uh-huh.
now it's like, oh yeah, but like, you know, like I need to like focus on community, you know, like especially after moving to a new place, you know,
Yeah.
or yeah, like focus on things where it's like, yeah. Well, like it's important to enjoy the passing of time while you're doing things that are meaningful on that deeper level.
Mm,
But I guess if the best answer I could think of right now is that you can have a meaningful life in like you can find meaning in the darkest of suffering, and you can find meaning like, you know, surrounded by your family
yeah.
in the most joyous, you know, set of circumstances.
Yeah, I think you're right in that meaning is always something to attain, whereas happiness is so out of your control in many ways, especially with
Hmm.
the suffering. And I
Hmm.
think that's why these questions and the matter of meaning becomes so present in people's lives when it gets difficult. Because they realize, well, happiness is not something I can have right now. So what's the point if before happiness was the most important thing to me, what could I possibly get out of this? Um, and then I think that's what you hold on to, and that's what we saw also in Viktor Frankl's book, where you see who are the people that survive in man's search for meaning, and those are the people that somehow find meaning in their suffering, um,
Hmm.
that believe that there's something still worth living for and suffering for, and yeah, so
There's another poem I wrote that was based off of, I think it was a line in Ecclesiastes,
mm,
but it says, "The greater my wisdom, the greater my grief. To increase knowledge only increases sorrow."
yes,
And then I sort of respond to it, which because it's not one of those that's one of those verses that's like not a prescription exactly. It's just
mm,
somebody like making, you know, commenting on their human experience in this like lamentation type prayer to God sort of thing. But but I sort of respond to it. And the Bible it goes on to it doesn't like leave it right there, you know. It's not just like, you know, that's all
mm-hmm,
you need to know, you know, but I sort of respond to that with the line of um but maybe a meaning filled suffering is better than mere happiness. Um maybe it goes on. I'm not sure I can recite it perfectly from memory, but
uh,
basically like sorting out that idea of there you a meaning filled suffering can sustain you, you know, and like pleasure won't sustain you. You can drown in pleasure.
yeah,
You know, if you pursue your hedonistic whims for long enough, you can drown in it. It can just become like a sea of it just transforms, especially when there's nothing that it's polarized against. You can drown in that, you know, and many people do. And many people in modern society know that to be true. You say that and people are like, yeah, I know what that's like.
yeah.
Um, especially when, yeah, yeah. I guess I'll leave that there. I don't have too many more articulated thoughts beyond that, but
You know your poems really well. That's really cool because I just listened to them, and so I know that you're correct in reciting all of them. So that's really awesome.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, bro. I write them, anything that makes it out, I've I've rewritten, probably 100 times, or I've at least reread it maybe hundreds of times. I
Yeah.
I think about it, because it's about how it feels, it's about how it feels in the whole context, and I read it, and it's really feeling driven in a lot of ways, and so yeah, I'll read something over and over and over and over, and then by the
Mm,
time I'm reading it and putting it online, it's pretty cemented in memory. I guess probably the more that I write, the less that'll be the case, but
yeah. I think that's really good. What is your process when you write a poem? Do you, because you said you listen to music as well, no? When you write poetry usually?
yeah, very often. A lot of times it depends. A lot of times something hits me, you know,
Mm,
and I like I have hundreds of pages of like written, piece of paper written stuff. Um, just notebooks full of lots of different types of writing. I sort of have them segmented out. Sometimes I'll be taking notes on stuff that I'm reading. Sometimes like a lot of the poetry stuff is just something kind of like boom, and like it kind of like hits me. Like it's like that light bulb sort of thing where it lights up and I just like have I run and grab my phone. And it's like I gotta write this down right now before I lose it. And then sometimes, most of the time, it's just something for me to remember. It's just like write this down. You can't forget that. And like, I'll come back a year later, months later, and be like, oh wow, like that's right. Like I forgot that. Good thing I wrote it down,
yeah,
like but sometimes things take a it just sort of happens. They take a more musical approach. When I was in Bali, I did a lot more like intentional writing.
I
And
see.
so I'd sit in a cafe and I'd have a playlist going, and I'd have a few different like pages, documents open of just different genres of ideas and different playlists attached to those genres of ideas.
Mm,
And then yeah, I would just when I write with music, it takes more of that like creative musical bent, that's for sure. And sometimes it just seems like, man, it's so important that I know this. I should just share it with people.
yeah. Yeah, I think you're doing one of the highest things you can do with language. So I'm happy you got onto it so early.
Wow.
Because
Yeah, thanks, man.
it's really
Thank you.
cool.
Do you do any poetry and things of that nature as well?
Yeah, actually, so I've journaled for 4 or 5 years now, and less so in the last year or two. But when I do journal now, it's usually a poem or something like that.
Mm.
Um, Something shorter where I try to express more meaning in less words. Whereas before it was literally just making my day schedule and just writing things about my workouts or whatever. Um,
Sure, sure.
yeah,
Which, man, that, is that important. You
yeah,
do
and I
that right,
think
it can look like poetry.
no, it's true. I think it's good to do that for a bit to be more systematic about your things. But once you understand that well enough and it's integrated into your system, I think for me now, writing is really trying to express what is underneath and that wants to come out. And so
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoy that about poetry. I never publish any of it because I don't think um, it would resonate with a lot of people yet. I think for a lot of things are very like specific to me, and I try to do it in different languages that I'm thinking through. So there's probably a bunch of grammar mistakes, which I've
Gotcha.
which
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
always
yeah.
had in my journals. But yeah, I do it a bit. I really enjoy it actually.
Hmm. There's I used to be much more concerned about like how broadly art was received.
Hmm.
And I think that I've become much more interested in, pleased with like deep, narrow connection. I
Yeah.
started doing something on my Instagram a while back. I used to have like a bigger social media following,
Hmm.
like I think I had like 20,000 people on my YouTube and, maybe twice the number of people on Instagram or something like that. And I
Hmm.
started, and I got a lot of these followers because I was shooting for a lot of big YouTubers who had nothing to do with who I was. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
was there working kind of. And so then these people that were fans of theirs would be like, oh, I want to follow this guy because he was standing next to somebody that I liked, you know what I mean? Or I'm shooting their videos or whatever, So then that sort of thing happens. And I started posting, and it was very, very like the most, what's the right word? Like young, influencer focused, like bang bang YouTuber kind of stuff. I don't want to use the word, you know, I don't want to use the word like liberal is what comes to mind,
Yeah,
right? But that like leftist liberal kind of thing. But I guess it's relevant because I started saying what I like actually thought about things around like when the COVID stuff was happening. I was like, yo, I think we're walking down a dangerous path here,
yeah,
and especially in terms of, especially when the race stuff got involved. And for me, like my family is like super racially diverse, like on
shit,
my dad's side, especially like one of my aunts is Mexican, one of them's Jewish, my dad's side is like Creole, which is like French Creole, French, Native American, African American. And so like, there's a bunch of like we got it all. We got it all on the Roque side of the family.
yeah,
And so the I guess like the utility that comes from that, I look mostly like a white dude kind of thing, right? But the utility that came from that for me was just like I was just, if people call me racist, I was like, I don't care. Like
yeah,
it didn't get to me. You know what I mean? It
yeah,
was like, I mean, it's never nice. Like if you're a sane person, it's never nice to like have people like coming after you.
yeah,
But 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 when there was things going on that land, I was like, guys, we don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. We don't want to like regress to making a person's anything they have absolutely no control of, their sex, their race, whatever. But I think the race is particularly pernicious for a few different reasons. But
mhm,
it's like if we make this a fundamental defining characteristic of people, like it's not going to go well. And man, has that played out over the course of the past few
yeah,
years. There's you know yeah, people focus on that, and then you get a retaliatory focus on that, and it's like, guys, everybody, like,
yeah,
let's
yeah. And
not
it's
do
it's by
this.
focusing on it or even rebelling against it that you're magnifying it even more. That's what
Right?
what
Because
I've noticed.
then there's an in-group, out-group, and the people placed in the out-group are like, okay, now we're an in-group.
Yeah,
And it's like, oh,
yeah,
no, yeah, we don't have to do this again, and we've had plenty of it in the past,
hmm,
particularly in the United States. It's like we had a segregated society, and many places in the world did, and then we collectively were like, yeah, let's not, this is bad, this is not a good thing, let's move
yeah,
away from this, and we did, and things got way better. And then there's been a recent dark revival that worries me.
yeah,
I don't think it's like past the point of no return by any means, but also too, it's worse than it was 4 years ago, worse than it was 8 years ago, it's worse than
yeah.
it
That's
was
for
10 years
sure.
ago.
Yeah, I
So
wonder
that's not good.
what that's gonna culminate into because it does feel like. I mean, there's a reason that these things pop up.
Hmm.
Um, and when they increase, I don't know what the end goal is there. And it's usually like a body without a head. Same thing that when you started this podcast with describing the people in power. Um, it's beyond the people in power. It's
Hmm.
its own thing. So that's what you see as well with people that are trying to cut things out of movies and whatnot. Usually, it's not even people that are offended. It's what people imagine people could be offended by, and so
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
no longer it doesn't feel connected anymore to anything real. And so yeah, it's a zombie type of agency. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Similar with
Hmm.
the money question, where it feels so detached. And I wonder what can attach things back to reality. I wonder how you can regain the center with things. Um,
it has to be this spiritual first, and the rest of it is downstream. I think it's the individual and the spiritual, and that's what I think like the Protestant, and there's criticisms and there's dangers of this too, but that's what I think like the Protestant Christianity stream got right so well, is that like this is personal relationship with God sort of thing, right? It's like that comes first, and I think like getting people to focus on that is what there's no better remedy to the political problems in the world. There's no better remedy to the economic problems in the world. President Bukele of El Salvador. I don't know if you saw
Mhm.
this. Tucker Carlson was interviewing him, and he asked him like, "What's the first step of your economic plan for your country?" And he responded and said, "Seek God's wisdom." And it was like, yeah,
Yeah,
maybe, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, yeah, like, right. Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe like when we're dealing with these things that we think are not related to the spiritual at all, it's like, yeah, well, what if we were operating from a place where we were attempting to embody the Holy Spirit
yeah,
in our dealings with each other and our dealings with in the political world and our dealings in the economic world, especially.
yeah. Because the I think the spiritual is always interested in you, and the spiritual is present in everything. But I think
Mhm.
when people say like, "Well, I'm not really into that type of stuff," it's like, well, your whole life is being guided by spirits. Like, don't you realize that there's like spirits
Right,
dominate your life, but
right.
you're opposed to spirituality because you've boxed it in somewhere, like it's something detached from you.
I
And
had a I had a friend at one of my old jobs that was like that asked me like, "Jake, are you religious?" And I was like, "I think everybody's religious, bro." Like, and he's like, "What are you talking about?" Like, I'm not religious.
mhm,
Nah. And I was like, everybody's guided by something. Everyone's
yeah,
guided by something, man. Like, and anyone that's honest enough to do a little bit of introspection will know that that's true. And then it's like, well, what are you guided by? Is God or is money your God? Are your sexual desires your God? Is
mhm,
it like what is it? What is it that drives you fundamentally? Like Freud thought like all human behavior essentially had like a sexual basis, like a reproductive basis. And it's not the worst theory ever, like if you go from a view things from an evolutionary psychology perspective, it's not the worst theory ever, but everybody has different theories for what it is, but
yeah,
when people are honest, it's like, yeah, something's driving you,
yeah,
and everybody, I also said to him too, I was like, everybody derives a morality from a story. It's like, what's the story that guides you?
mhm,
And I don't use story just to mean like fictional made up accounts exactly, but it's like, because I think all of creation is a story. I think that's why I think when you view creation through that lens, a lot of things make more sense. People are like, why is there evil in the world if God is good? Like, why would he create all this evil? And it's like, well, it's such a better work of art to have a story. If you had a story where there's a bunch of like
yeah,
robots hanging out, like, hey, good to see you, Tom. Hey, good to see
yeah,
you, Bill. Like going out, like nothing was wrong ever. It would be the lamest, most uninteresting story of all time. Like,
yeah,
and it's as much tragedy as there is in the world, it's much more exciting. Even when we look at like you're familiar with the idea of the fourth turning, right?
yes,
The four turnings, right? So that's a lot of Bitcoiners talk about this, and it's basically this. To sum it up for people who don't know, how would you there's this old Greek idea of a saculum, I believe is what it's
mhm,
called, which is like an 80 to 100 year period of time where essentially all those who experienced the last great catastrophe have passed away, and so the society has collectively forgotten the lessons learned, and it primes the society for the next great catastrophe that's like a paradigm shift for your society. And so I think we're on the tail end of our current fourth turning that came off the back of World War II, essentially Bretton Woods Agreement. What was that, like 1948 or something?
mhm,
So we're in that same time frame, and how this relates to the story idea is that like people complain about, it's sort of a bummer to be. Well, is it a bummer? There's pros and cons to being born and living through a fourth turning, right? Because there's a
yeah,
lot of turmoil and there's so much change and it's uncomfortable and you got to like stay on your toes. You got to be ready to adapt. You got to be paying attention. You can't just like sit around and not pay attention, right?
yeah,
But it's so exciting, you know? It's like, especially if you're like engaging and playing in the game that's taking place, it's so exciting. And sometimes it's overwhelming. Sometimes it's really overwhelming,
yeah,
frankly. But
yeah,
especially the more like as you progress from like pawn to bishop to, till as you like move up
yeah,
in the utility that you're playing in the game, it's alarming and distressing, but also it's so exciting.
yeah.
And it's like, yeah, there's pros and cons, but it's so much better than just living through a boring, stable,
Stasis. Yeah.
Well, yeah, pros and cons. It's hard to say if it's better, but yeah,
But it
it's
is what it is,
exciting.
and like it brings
Right.
responsibility, so it brings meaning if you want it.
There's
So
something to do,
yeah.
it's like, and it's obvious. It's like there's a lot wrong, which gives you purpose, right? Our
Yeah.
purpose is found in the problems that bother us the most.
Yeah. Jake, my family's eating dinner almost, so I'm sorry to have
Very
to cut it
nice.
off here, but I could have talked for hours more. It's been lovely to chat to you. I'm
Absolutely, bro. Yeah, really great to chat. Well, I'd love to. I told you I was setting this all up and stuff. I'm trying to get something along the lines of what you've got
mhm.
going on over here as well,
Good.
So it'd be great to chat more. And yeah, bro, I mean, so I'm 28, man. You're
Hmm.
22 and you're deep down some things that took me a long time to sort out, and it's great for you to be there at 22. You just got married, like
Thank you.
just some like encouragement, man. I
Thank
think
you.
you're really, yeah, I've listened to a couple of things you've done, and I think you're really on the right track, and much more so than a lot of people your age, especially as well. But even throwing age out the
I was
window, I
gonna
feel
say,
like you're crushing
well,
it.
to you, 28 is still like super young, and I have a lot to learn from you, and so keep aiming up. And I'm excited to stay in contact. I'm excited to talk again. So let's do that.
Same to you, bro. Same to you. Sounds
All right.
great, man.
Have a good
Great
day.
to chat. Talk to you
Yeah.
soon.